Hey, Mark.
Hello.
And hey, everybody out there. It's Halloween Eve, and we're here to talk about Hellboy, the Crooked Man, a film that went direct to streaming. They used to say direct to video or direct to DVD, and now everything is direct to streaming.
Yeah,
But it's still kind of the same thing.
it's still the same
Um,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, bypass the movie theaters, and tonight we're going to talk about why that might be. Um, But we are Earth's
Um,
mightiest critics, two of them. I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat, and we have Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck of the Special Mark Productions and the Spoiler Room Podcast. Mark, usually you come in here and you've got something of a cute handle, a cute name. Am I to take your lack of a cute name tonight as an indication of your enthusiasm for Hellboy the Crooked Man?
well, initially, full disclosure, I hadn't planned on watching this actually.
And you're in
But
good company with like most of America. Right.
but when I saw that you were going to do the live stream, I'm like, yeah, okay, you know what? Let's roll the dice and find out. And yeah, there's no cute handle tonight, but yeah, this is going to be a mixed bag, I think. Um,
Okay.
it's
Um,
yeah, it's not going to necessarily be like totally slam, but at the same time, there's room for improvement. So
Boy, howdy. Let's start with okay. Unlike previous Hellboy movies, because we had the Guillermo del Toro movies, the first
yeah,
one I'd forgotten turns 20 this year,
wow.
2004, and then we had the sequel Golden Army a few years after that, and then in 2018,
Mhm.
1917, one of those years.
It was just after Stranger Things was second season or something like that. David
Hmm.
Harbour was the guy for a little while.
Yeah. By a little while, you mean one film, because they came out with another movie. I believe it was just called Hellboy, and
Yes,
that movie was what it was. And I'll have
2019. Yeah.
okay. Oof. I'll have a link down below tomorrow to the audio podcast we did for that movie. I remember not caring for it very much, praying for death several times during its interminable runtime. I like David Harbour a lot, but he really does need a good role in order to show off his talents.
Mhm.
Um, and now we have The Crooked Man, but unlike those other films, this is actually an adaptation of a Mike Mignola comic. He's the writer artist who created Hellboy all those many years ago, and very talented, very kind of deceptively minimalistic artist. And it's interesting to see his work adapted by other creators, such as the case with The Crooked Man. Now, in
Oh, look at
preparation for this
that.
show, yes, I picked up the Crooked Man graphic novel, which actually contains the Crooked Man and the sequel, The Return of Effie Kolb.
Mhm.
Uh, I'd not read either of them, and I figured, well, I'll give it a shot in preparation for this film. And I'm in that unenviable position of really wishing I hadn't, because wow, it's different. There's I don't know why they can't just adapt the source material, Mark. Why do people feel the need to take something perfect, like a graphic novel that is storyboards in flip book form, and say, it's not good enough. We need to add some stuff that maybe genre fans have seen 1,000 times. Maybe that would make it better.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I would have thought they would have took a page from 300 because, that's basically what they did. They basically used the comic as the storyboards and pretty much adapted it. They kind of did that with Watchmen as well, which is why those were a little bit more popular in that, they took a lot of the key panels or even Last of Us. I'm a big huge fan of Last of Us. I played through the game at least 3 times. And so when I watched the TV series, I was like, holy crap, they knew what they were doing because they pretty much took from game to screen.
Hmm.
They knew they played around with some of it, but they knew the key points and panels that everybody loved or scenes that they had to hit and replicate perfectly. Otherwise, they were going to suffer the burns. And I don't get it with comics. I really don't because, yeah, you've got it all right there. just translate that. There's a reason why that was popular. There's a reason why the fan base loved that story. Just take that, interpret that into live action, and people will come and see it. You know, especially if you cast decently, and it's got a, you know, doesn't even need a high budget. I mean, Deadpool proved that it didn't need a huge budget. They made the first one what, like 90 mil or something like that, which is, you know, for a superhero film, that's like chump change nowadays. So yeah, I don't understand the approach either by producers in that to, hey, let's take liberties with it, or the directors who go, you know, when I made this film, I hadn't read a single comic from this series, but I didn't think I needed to. I think I just went right with the script, and we went from. And it's like, you know, it's if you want to appeal to the already established fan base that is there, just take it from page to screen and just replicate those things. Sure, tweak it a bit, but some of the iconic panels and stuff that people love, make sure you hit those key moments. And I don't understand how they don't do that, how they continually miss the mark with a lot of adaptations.
Yeah, and you know, especially with something that is, you know, this movie is direct to streaming, and it's very, you can tell it's low budget compared to a lot, you know, certainly its predecessors.
Mhm.
But I mean, there is an opening sequence involving a demonic spider that is, I mean, I thought we had moved past the Sci-Fi Channel era of digital graphics, and boy, was I wrong. Like the light sourcing, I don't want to get too like geeky about it, but I was watching this. I'm like, no, this is all wrong. This is like second pass here. We need like 5 more before you can say, yeah, we can release this to the public. Um, but, you know, that's and I knew I was off to a rocky start. First, I gotta pull over a second
Yeah.
because I need to welcome
Miguel.
Miguel. Miguel,
Hello,
okay, I'm here.
Miguel.
Let's get started. We are getting started. And man, I I love that you're here. You are the reason we are talking about this movie because you recommended it to me. And I hate to be the one to we're going to eviscerate it. Well, partially. There are some rays of light, I think, probably mostly coming from Mark on this one. But over the next, say, 40, 50 minutes, we're going to talk about this movie and why I don't think it works. Look, Miguel, no, I'm not mad at you.
He
And,
hasn't gotten mad at me for the movies I make him watch for my show, Miguel. He's not mad at you at all. No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
I will say I can't be mad because uh, this inspired me to buy the graphic novel. I could have borrowed it from the library, I found out after I pressed order on Amazon. But no, I did, and after reading it, especially with the amazing artwork by Richard Corbin, and then the artist on the second story, the sequel, I want to get his name right because Zach Howard, phenomenal artists.
Mhm.
I'm glad that I read the source material, and it's going to stay with me a lot longer than I think this movie will. And right off the bat, with the whole spider thing, that wasn't in the novel, the graphic novel. There's so much that they added to this story, which the graphic novel itself clocks in at something like 83 pages, which is not that much shorter if you go page a minute
About
than
that, yeah.
this movie. It's a relatively short feature. So again, I don't understand the meddling. I also don't appreciate the addition of characters. This movie takes place in 1959.
Yeah.
It's a quibble, but the graphic novel takes place in 58. It's a small town in Appalachia. Hellboy and a kind of rookie BPRD agent, played by, well, let's see. Well, Hellboy is played. We got a new Hellboy, Jack Kesey, and his BPRD newbie is played by Adeline Rudolph. She plays Bobby Joe Song. They're en route. They're on a train to deliver this demon spider creature back to Professor Broom at the BPRD. It gets loose. They have to go and chase it down. It escapes into the sewers of 1950s Appalachia. They kind of wander into town. They discover a house with a whole bunch of people gathered around because there's a dead body on the floor. That leads to another guy kind of wandering into the scene. His name's Tom. He goes with them to this other place and finds a witch named Cora, and there's this other witch named Effie Kolb, and she is the servant of the crooked man who was once a man but decided to serve the devil, and then he was killed, and now he goes around collecting souls, which he transforms into pennies. It's very convoluted. A lot of that, though, is in the source material, except there is no secondary BPRD agent. There is no Bobby Joe Soong.
So it's Hellboy on his own?
Yes.
Oh,
It's Hellboy teaming up with Tom.
sure.
And that's all you need, because the only thing that the Bobby Joe character adds to this movie is an actress who performs in a completely contemporary speaking style and mannerisms that do not match the 1950s at all. That's not to say that Hellboy and Tom exactly do that either, but it's more like Tom is of the hills. Like a lot of the people in the Appalachian setting, they're just I don't want to offend anybody, but they're kind of like stuck in time. You know, there's nothing. I don't know that you can modernize that. They're not going around saying like "Hey, dude" or whatever. And then Hellboy is just kind of his traditional kind of gruff, not
Mhm.
man of few words self. But then you've got this Bobby Joe lady who just, it looks like she was transported from 2024 into 1958. Now, if that's part of a character, that could be kind of interesting. She's one of the BPRD kind of freaks, like an Abe Sapien is a fish man. Hellboy is a demon who's seen the light and is tracking down the paranormal. And then we've got a time traveler somehow.
Sure.
That kind of works. But this is just kind of weird and wrong. And there's something involving her character at the very end of the movie that just, Mark, it upset me. It's her reaction to the death of another character that I almost threw my laptop across the room. But not having read the source material, Mark, what do you make of the overall vibe of this movie?
Overall vibe. I dug a lot of parts of it. I didn't think I would dig Hellboy, but I actually enjoyed Hellboy. And the actor, I don't have it in front of me, but the actor who played Hellboy, I actually liked
Jack Kesey, yeah.
Yeah, Jack Kesey. Thank you. I know you just mentioned it, but I got short-term broken brain.
Oh, I get it.
But I think he did actually well for this Hellboy in this setting. Actually, I liked his Hellboy. I was worried at first, but then when I saw him in action and in context versus the horrible trailer that had been put out, where I see he's not trying to be Harbor or Perlman, he's being his own. I appreciated that, and I liked that because his Hellboy fit the story.
Yeah.
And even his makeup for overall, the chess piece was a little fakey, but for the most part, his makeup worked for me. But just his overall attitude and an approach to everything, I'm like, okay, we're talking 1959 Hellboy here. He's, he's not quite jaded, but I liked his overall character. I wish he would have been in a better handled story, because if you're right, if you cut out his partner, which sounds horrible, but she really didn't add much of anything to the story at all.
Right.
She added this one element that really didn't serve anything, especially when you told me the spider wasn't in the source material. If you take the spider out, you don't need her.
Right. And then they do that thing where one of the characters, I don't know if it was Tom or the preacher they run into later, but they have that thing of like, "Oh, she doesn't know how you really feel about her." I'm like, "Wait, now we're gonna add some kind of a
Yes.
romance subplot to this? What? They have no chemistry anyway."
No, they didn't have any chemistry, and it made no sense because this is the first time we've been introduced to this Hellboy and this pairing with his partner. So even now where you're trying to already allude that he cares for her, you haven't spent enough time with these characters to even justify trying to start that storyline. It just, some of it felt rushed, and I loved parts of it. I liked the gothic feeling. I loved actually the whole sequence pretty much with the witches, and when the crooked man shows up at the church, and I enjoyed the priest character quite a
Mhm.
bit. And I liked Hellboy with our good old boy he meets in the hills. I love that part
Tom,
of
yeah.
it. Tom,
Mhm.
you know, it's like they could have, if they're worried about budget, they could have thinned this even a little bit better and made a nice leaner story where you don't need all these characters, because this is pretty straightforward story. Not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, you know, Crooked Man deals with souls, wants to come after so and so. Hellboy wants to stop Crooked Man because he's like, oh hell no, not on my watch, and he pairs up with local to help fight the local demon. There's nothing wrong with this, especially with a VOD movie. That's all you need in here. You don't need an additional character who's studying witchcraft, but they literally do, like, you know uh swing for the fences Charlie type of thing near the end, where inside they're smashing water glasses, and similar spirit here, where just suddenly out of nowhere it's like, oh wait, here. um yeah, but I like the Hellboy. I like the settings. I love the story, the mythos with Crooked Man and the witches working with him, and all of the gothic type stuff. And then you would get to his partner, who, like you said, just doesn't fit this story. And there's now good reason why she doesn't fit this story.
Yeah, there's a part of me that wonders if, because the source story was written or came out in 2008.
Mhm.
I feel like, because if you take her out, it really is just a story about, a couple of guys, and like all the women in the story are witches. You've got Cora, you've got
Mhm.
Effie Kolb, and so I'm wondering if they're like, we got to balance this out a little bit. You don't need to. You can just have like kind of a guy buddy paranormal activity or investigator story. I think it works. Or actually do something with this character. Plus, she's not a character from the comics that was brought in. She's a completely original creation for
Right.
this movie. And as a BPRD agent, she's just, I mean, at least Hellboy has an outfit. She's literally got this like gray jumpsuit on. I don't know what's what's going on there.
See,
Um,
and that doesn't make sense. If you wanted to try to bring her in to balance it out or whatever, you already get that with the one witch who is a good witch, or trying to be a good witch,
mhm, right.
and you already have that. You have that element. You don't need the other part. This is should be a Hellboy story, just him been sent on a lone mission of sort. It's, yeah, it really, it, it sounds odd, but I actually would like this to be even thinner as far as characters, and pretty straightforward in story, because visually some of the stuff they do in here is really cool. Some of the action pieces they do in here are really fun. And then
Some
we get insert new character. And it's like,
some of, I mean, it's as far as the action part, it's weird because comics, and I know it's completely, it on one hand it's unfair of me to keep going back to the comics because the movie is not the comic book. On the other hand, the only reason we're talking about this movie is because it was a comic book first,
right.
right?
Mhm.
So the thing is, with comics, you can read them. You've got kind of your own paces. You are your own cameraman, so you're looking at this still. But when you've got panels like Richard Corbin does of going through the woods, yes, that's still images, but you can imagine, are we going through fast? We're going through slow. Brian Taylor, who is a director, I was looking up his IMDb. I realized that we have a very mixed history. He did Crank, a movie that I loved.
Mm.
They did
Mhm.
Crank 2, a movie that I wanted to walk out of. He did, oh my gosh, I can't even read my own handwriting. Um, e- Ghost Rider
Mm.
2,
Mhm.
and he also did Mom and Dad, a movie that that turned my stomach so much I don't even know if I can fairly evaluate it, even
Oh.
after having watched it twice.
See,
Um,
I enjoyed Mom and Dad, but anyway.
I it I think we didn't we talk about this on your
Mhm.
show?
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think my problem with Mom and Dad is, it felt like a movie that hated kids because no one involved in the movie actually had kids.
Yeah.
So
I
I'm
remember that. I remember you say that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um, but so here, I just feel like he's bringing those hyperkinetic sensibilities to the woods, and all I can think about while I'm watching this is he's trying really hard to be Sam Raimi on a, with a bigger budget,
Mhm.
but you don't need a big budget with Sam Raimi. the last Doctor Strange movie proved that. I know we disagree on that one, but no, it's so hyperkinetic in parts where the camera is moving all around. You got these different lenses and stuff. Like, it is working overtime to distract from the fact that there's not much in terms of the story. I kept wanting to move it along. Yeah, it's a weird spot to be in. But the priest, they do run into an older black priest who is blind. He's actually, I couldn't place where I'd seen the actor from. And I realized it's I want to get his name right 'cause I haven't thought about it in a long time. Joseph Marcel plays Reverend Watts, and you might have seen him as Jeffrey, the butler on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
I thought I recognized him. I couldn't quite. I recognized the voice a bit, but I couldn't quite place it. I'm like, he seems familiar, but I'm like, I can't quite place where I had seen the actor before, because I liked the priest quite a bit, actually. I mean, he really puts his all into this character, and it's an interesting character. That's the thing, is a couple of these sub character, side characters that they have are very interesting. Yeah, I'm like, that's a cool character. That feels like someone who would be in this world of Hellboy.
Yeah, and again, I like the character. I don't like the way he's performed because
Mm,
he is, when we encounter him, it's almost like he's been out in these woods and he's gone insane because he's very kind of over the top and
yeah.
a little bit too Appalachian for my tastes, almost stereotypically so.
Mm,
Whereas if you read the comic book, and again, it's just me kind of reading it, and I've got my own voice in my head of what this character
sure.
sounds like. But even as written and drawn, he's an old priest. He's
Mhm.
not, crazy. He's not losing his mind. Um, he certainly isn't the kind of guy to go down into a mine shaft with this BPRD agent and encountering the giant spider and then getting killed at the end. Sorry, spoilers. Um, that whole bit, and it's because it involves Bobby Joe. None of that happened in the story. It was all pretty much the big climax at the in the church house, and I think they do go back to the Crooked Man's house
Mm,
at one point. But it's all kind of mixed around. They add that whole thing, and I realized when the spider goes down into the sewers in the opening of the film, I
mm,
flash forward to the end of the film, like, yes, this is going to be the big climactic or part of the big climactic
mhm.
battle. And I hate that I could predict the ending of this movie in a way that I couldn't predict the end of the story when I cracked open the book.
Yeah, I mean, the predictability didn't bug me too much, but it the whole part with down in the sewer and that too, it just eh, I mean, there's ways you could do it if you want to add new elements to something like this to make it kind of flow if you want to add, but it really felt like just this tacked on story with her and the spider and the the mine tunnels underneath everything. It really felt tacked on. It was like whenever I got to that section, I'm like, when are we going to get back to Hellboy and Danny? Because I that was an more interesting dynamic, and the witch, those three, that was a more interesting dynamic than Bobby Joe in the mine. And again, this is no slight to the performer or anything at all.
Yeah.
I think she was fine. I'm with you, and I didn't read the source material, so I have no idea. I just know that watching it, she felt so out of place that it was awkward whenever we went back to her. Or, there were times when all of a sudden she would speak up, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's right. He's got a partner." Because because uh, you know, because I was so into the horror elements that they do put in here, which I really appreciate. The more horror elements that we get in here, more gothic, like we said, mountain Appalachian type of horror, that type of setting. We get that. And those elements felt fitting for the environment. It's not like these felt out of place or they were doing some kind of flashy thing. All of this felt like mountain horror, that
Yeah.
type of setting, from the way the witches look to the crooked man to the type of magic that is used, or the spells that are used by all these folks. That all felt like it fit. It didn't feel out of place. She felt out of place in pretty much every scene she was in, and it's not the performer, it's the way she was written. It's like, oh, now we have the slicker looking agent. She's back, and she's, and she's adding some exposition that anybody could have really added if you didn't even need all of that. What exposition she gets into and talking about magic, and her little subplot didn't fit really the rest of the story.
Well, no, especially because I'm going to use agent in the loosest possible term because I think you referred to as she was working in the library at the
Yeah,
BPRD and she was along for this mission for her expertise or something. But she is, uh, pretty unshakable, like during encountering all these like crazy things that, she's kind of the modern, action movie heroine, which is fine, but that's also not who I think of when I think, oh, she was a librarian who was kind of recruited to go on this mission for whatever. If she'd been, I'm not saying that she needs to be rescued by Hellboy. Just react to certain situations in the way that you might react, Mark, if the dead started crawling up out of the ground and attacking you.
well, I think they were trying to play at the fact that the reason she was doing field work is because she was fascinated by things and she wanted to experience things, and that passion or that drive may have override the angle you could take with her character of being shocked by what's going on. I think that's
Well,
what they were trying to go for. I don't think it was handled well, but I think that was what they were trying to convey with her character, is that her curiosity and fascination and wanting to actually experience all these things that she's only been reading in books was outweighing her any fear or hesitation she had to possibly a fault. I think that's what they were trying to go for. Not saying they accomplished that here, but that's what
no,
I think they were trying to go for with her.
possibly, and I think they missed the mark, and if that's the
Mhm.
case, because you use the term to a fault, and I agree because like she's charging down into those mines. There is one bit where the lights go out and she has kind of a panic attack. That was
Mhm.
kind of nice to see. But I think about I don't know if you saw the recent adaptation from like 2 years ago, All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah, I did.
You did okay.
Yes, I
That
did watch
no,
that.
I think that was a hell of a movie. It's like the ultimate slash last war film I think we ever need to see. But what you have there is a group of teenage boys who are, kind of basically conscripted into going to fight, and they've got these romantic notions of what it's supposed to be like to go and be involved in battle. And the second they get these uniforms shoved onto them that are basically taken off of dead people
Yeah.
and put onto the battle lines, they're like half of them are screaming, and most of them want to go home or they're getting blown up right away. So you can take that angle with this character and show some kind of a realism. This stuff is so fantastical that when you start adding stuff that is blatantly unnatural or
Mhm.
untrue to human nature, I think that's where you kind of lose it because, like, well, now I can't believe in anything. What I wanted to get to, I'll jump ahead a bit. Again, spoilers. I'm not even bothered to put on the banner because that requires an amount of effort that I'm not willing to invest in
Wow.
Hellboy the Crooked Man. Um,
Woo!
yes.
We got the
At
spice
the
going
end,
on tonight.
seriously, at the end of the movie,
Yeah.
when Bobby Joe and the priest, Reverend Watts, go down into the mines, um, he gets attacked by a swarm of bats,
Bats.
birds, some kind
Yeah,
of
they're
demons. Yeah.
bats. Yes.
And they poke his eyes out and he dies horribly.
Or
Now,
crows. No, I think they were crow
the
or bat.
crows.
They were crows. They were crows. Yeah, they were because they pecked his eyes out. Yeah, they were crows.
Okay. I couldn't tell because it was just like dark and there were wings and stuff. And I think I'd tuned out at that point, honestly. But later, after the evil has been defeated and Hellboy comes back to the cabin to find Bobby Joe, she's like, "Oh, I'm so glad you made it." He's like, "I'm glad you made it." And then he was like, "By the way, wasn't what happened to Reverend Watts?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, he didn't make it." And they were both kind of fine with that. Like that scene ends with them smiling. I'm like, no, they just went through something horrible, and their new friend, the guy who did everything he could to defend them and try and save the world, was horribly murdered by demons. And they're smiling at the end of that scene. I have no idea what's going on with this picture.
I forgot they were smiling, but yeah, he gave him the blessed shovel, which helped destroy the zombies and such being raised by the witches and the crooked man, which I like the blessed shovel. I like that idea. I'm like, again, there are a lot of chunks of this film that I really enjoyed. It's just that it's like putting a puzzle together you got from Goodwill, and you're really enjoying the picture, but there's like those missing pieces that you aren't going to get,
Or
or you
pieces from
got
other puzzles.
or pieces from other puzzles that you're like, I've spent an hour trying to put this somewhere on the corner, and this just does not fit this picture. And that's what we have here. You get into these moments, like, I loved the idea. Now, I'm gonna say, I just watched Crackoon last week, and the CGI, I kid you not, the CGI raccoon, which they have very few scenes with the actual raccoon moving about. Otherwise, it's usually a puppet, a practical effect. But there are some very brief moments, and the filmmakers know that they were on a budget, where they used a CGI raccoon, and you could tell very blatantly it was CGI. I shit you not. The raccoon in this movie looked like it was the same animation from that film.
With the raccoon that crawls into the skin?
Yeah, with the raccoon that crawls into the skin. When it comes down the window, it's obviously CGI with the light, like you said, the lighting's off on it. Looking at it, I'm like, that literally looks like the animation that was used in Crackoon for the raccoon there, when it had to move, when they show distance of it moving away. But that was only brief. Here we get a full scene of it. But I like that whole segment of her being cursed and having to get back in her skin. And I even liked the other witch, who
Effie?
was Effie. I really liked the Effie witch actually quite a bit. She was an interesting character, having turned Daniel's dad into the horse, and the whole thing. I mean, I'm like, those are the elements I loved in this. And then we'd get to some moment where we're just like, oh, we're back now. Okay, we're back to the movies story, obviously. And yeah, now you're losing me again. And then they pull me back in. So it was a lot of in and out. I mean, overall, I didn't think the film was bad, but I watch a lot of like indie films, so this definitely had a feel of a little bit higher budgeted indie horror film for most of the look of things. But at the same time, I'm like, there's opportunities here to really make this just a straightforward, interesting gothic horror with Hellboy. And I would have been so much more into it then. You know, but even the sequence in Crooked Man's house, I loved that part where we get to learn about Hellboy and how he feels about his mom and what's happening to his mom's soul. Well, again, not handled exactly great. I thought at least it was interesting, something that we hadn't really explored with a Hellboy character from what I remember from other movies, in that we were diving a little deeper into that. Was it handled well in the film? No, but
But it's still a highlight, is what you're saying.
it was a highlight because it was interesting and something we hadn't quite seen in the other Hellboy films addressed. Hellboy was pretty much Hellboy. I mean, Hellboy, he's either chosen to be the chosen one where he grows his horns in the last one before this, or he's Ron Perlman's guy, but here we explore a little bit more with his mom in that. And I found it interesting. I just wish it would have been handled better, because I'm just like, especially if we revisited it, the fact we come back to it twice when we only needed it once was also a little bothersome.
Well, it's confusing because I am not deep on the Hellboy lore. I've read some of the comics, including the ones to prepare for tonight, and that whole mom plot line is nowhere to be seen in the Crooked Man or its sequel on the page.
Sure.
So my question is, and I watched the 2019 Hellboy once, which is one too many times, and I've seen the other ones, I think, twice, but that's over the course of 2 decades. So my recollection is Hellboy was kind of like discovered, and then brought into the BPRD. I don't remember any reference of a mom. So when she shows up in this movie and she just kind of is there, and then they're having this long conversation about, I don't even know what the hell they were talking about, because she's damned, or she gave up on him, or he felt abandoned. I'm like,
well, she was damned because she made a deal with the devil. Well, she was going to, and then she wanted to try to back out, but it was too late. She was already pregnated with his child, who was Hellboy. So Hellboy's
Was
the son of the devil.
okay. I
That's
don't.
what was going on with that,
Okay,
if I'm
that
remembering it correctly. I just watched it 2 nights ago, and I'm kind of struggling to remember those bits. I
I
remember the
watched
parts,
it.
like I mentioned, the gothic horror parts. I love those parts. I remember those. Those bits are a little harder to pull up.
I watched it today, and I don't remember any of that. Um, which is on me, frankly. But no, here's the thing. Like that seems, in terms of the movie lore, that's a new thing to introduce.
Right.
But they treat it as if like, oh, everybody kind of knows about this.
Mhm.
And my problem with that scene is, okay, take this and make it into an actual plot and weave it throughout the entire film, have it mean something, which it doesn't. It's basically just the crooked man using, getting into Hellboy's mind and creating these illusions to
Right.
distract him, basically. But my
Mhm.
issue is Hellboy does this for a living. He's a paranormal investigator, brawler. He hangs out with freaks and ghosts and stuff all the time. How can he be this thick to be carrying on a conversation, quote unquote, with his mom and not realize, oh, she's
Well,
not really here?
and again, as I said, I like the concept, but the execution of the idea is poorly handled, because for that exact reason, you're right. If they wanted the weight of his mother's suffering to mean more, we needed to have it haunt him, and have him surprised that it's haunted him, or him thinking about it when he arrives in the woods, because the woods is the crooked man's woods. So if they alluded to it when he first gets into the woods, like hears a voice, or gets a just a brief vision out of the corner of his eye, say of his burning mom, and then it's like, huh, and then she's gone, stuff like, bring it in and kind of, like you said, build up to it, at least give us a little hint, but we don't. We get it in one nightmare scene, and then we get it revisited later when he's in the house, when the crooked man's trying to fool them with the illusion, and that's it. And you're just like, oh, okay. I'm like, I want to get back to him fighting the crooked man.
Well, or say, or she made a deal with the devil. It's not that hard to make it. She made a deal with the crooked man, who is the soul
Right.
broker, and
Mhm.
he's the one that damned mom to hell, or say he's playing Satan's pimp or whatever. So
Yeah.
creating Hellboy and also destroying his mom or his family. Then you make it personal, but it's also a bigger scope of a movie than what we're dealing with right now, trying to stuff all this other stuff into a movie that doesn't really need it. And it's just it's frustrating.
Th-
Um,
Yeah.
but because I want to say, like, I feel like, excuse me, as I eructate on the microphone, um, I feel like as you're talking about, like, tonally, in terms of the atmosphere, this, I think, gets really close to, what I've read in the comics. I mean, Del
Mhm.
Toro's version was kind of candy colored and big and like very expensive, and kind of created an Elseworlds version of Hellboy that I didn't appreciate the first time I watched it, but I now I love those movies. And the 2019 version was sort of a more comic booky, cartoonish version of
Mhm.
that same thing. Here, I really like the aesthetic. I like that Jack Kesey, although I'm not a fan of his face makeup. I think there's something a little bit too 58-year-old Beverly Hills housewife plastic surgeon thing about the mouth
Yeah.
that
No,
doesn't
yeah,
work.
yeah.
When he talks, I'm like,
Mhm.
his lips don't really move. But I do love that his profile, because if you look at Hellboy in any of the comics, he's almost got like a triangle shaped
Mhm.
body where he doesn't have shoulders, or just constantly sloped down, and he kind of has that. Even Perlman had like the big kind of like
Yeah.
Hulk bulk to him. So yeah, I like that. I just think that, and it's surprising that Mignola was. This is the first time I think he's said he's gotten some kind of a writing credit on one of these movies, and so he's attached to and to some degree proud of this work, which I don't quite understand, because he wrote the comic this was based on, and then he wrote slash I assume watched the movie that came out of that comic, and that must have been one hell of a money truck, because
Oh
there's
god, yeah,
big
I
difference.
imagine. Oh yeah, I imagine there was. Well, even for the Crow remake, Was it Dave? He was, I think, listed in the credits, not just based on characters, but as if he had input. Now, I know he had input early on. I don't think he had it on this final version, the creator of The Crow having, that input. So they credit him that way. Maybe that's what you have here. Or he had one of the earlier scripts, and then they were like, oh yeah, no, we're gonna do our own thing, or things changed during production, like they always do, like we've learned now through scripts of how much crap they change with original scripts with some movies. Some due to challenges, and some to just sitting there going, I think I want to do this instead.
Mark, you mentioned the word crap, and that's another problem I have with this movie. Not that it's crap, goes without saying, but in the comics and in some of the other movies, crap is kind of like Hellboy's bub, like Wolverine has,
Yeah.
right? It's just a word that's like, oh, he says that, and it's kind of funny. Um, this movie is very much rated R, I believe,
Mhm.
because there's f bombs and swearing all over this movie. So and coming out of Hellboy's mouth, he says fuck a lot. So when he says crap, that just feels like it's a catchphrase, but it doesn't match. I'm like, no, that guy would say shit
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of like what's the all of a sudden the restraint, Hellboy? What's going on here?
Well, they
Ugh.
wanted to work that in because that's from the comics. So,
They that did not stop them in any other domain.
oh, I know. I know.
Yeah.
I'm just playing a little Hellboy advocate here. So I think that was their approach. Yeah. Again, it's confusing. I would love to see someone. Heck, I'd even try to take a stab at it. Why not? I couldn't make it any worse. And I didn't hate it. Don't get me wrong. I was entertained. It's just that it was fleeting. I finished it and I'm like, okay, I watched it.
Hmm.
And okay, I'm glad I watched it for parts of it. There you go. Moving on. You could take this and trim it down. I'd love to see like a fan edit where they kind of cut out like the spider subplot of sorts. Uh, you know, or not cut it out, have it get it to them, have it get, yeah, some way kind of cut out a good chunk of the section to lean it down to where it's mostly Hellboy fighting Crooked Man, or learning of Crooked Man, and bring it to that, because as it sounds like from what you said with the comic, reading it, that's the core of the story, and I don't know why they didn't stick with that, because there's plenty there visually, especially with just the way that you could you know do a lot with, I think, and make a nice little solid 90-minute thing.
Almost. In the comic, the Crooked Man is almost he's kind of the MacGuffin.
Mm.
Effie Kolb, which I think it speaks to the fact that they made a sequel in the
Sequel, right?
comic about her.
Mhm.
She's more of like his agent, and there's a lot more involving her character than
Sure.
there is even in this movie. This movie, you like the performance, and I'll give the actress credit. She did what she was called to do. Leah McNamara playing Effie
Mhm.
Kolb, this sort of like temptress agent of Satan. But to me, she seemed like good value or great value Sherry Moon Zombie.
She had a Sherry Moon Zombie vibe. I will not deny it, though. I like Sherry Moon Zombie, so maybe that's what the appeal was. You know, but yeah, you're right. No, it was like, man, if Rob Zombie had directed this, Sherry Moon would be playing that character.
But she would have been Sherry Moon Zombie. Like I say, great value because there is something very particular about her as an actress, and I really like her too. Haven't liked all the stuff she's been in, but when she's got an it factor that you can't quite replicate. When someone
Right.
tries to do it, you can say, "Oh,
Mhm.
they're trying to do this." And again, that's no fault of hers because that's what she was asked to do. But yeah, I will say, like the Crooked Man, as far as his design, there was something like how in the Marvel movies they in Logan they flash forward to the future, and Logan's old and Professor X is all old. This movie I felt like was Old Man Leprechaun, like the Warwick Davis movies, because he looks like
He does.
the Leprechaun, like as a member of ARP. What is going on here? But I will say his defeat or one of the defeats, because he comes back a couple of times, but when they blow his head off or they chop his head off something, but he disintegrates into the coins, the pennies.
Yes. Mhm.
And I thought that was such a cool visual.
It was.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, that you got the body with the clothes and stuff and all these pennies instead of brains everywhere. It's like little Lincolns everywhere. It's kind of fun. Um,
Yeah, well, they have that whole that whole sequence when they break the nightmare rooms, and Hellboy and Daniel are together, and Hellboy's kind of getting his butt kicked a bit by Crooked Man, because Crooked Man's a demon in a old man's body. But
Wait, when you
when
say Danny, you mean Tom?
or Tom, excuse me,
Yeah, okay.
Tom. When he's with Tom, and they both take on Crooked Man, and then they start knocking him down the stairs, and as he's going down the stairs, he's losing his pennies, which are the souls he's collected. And I liked that whole sequence. He goes down the stairs, he keeps losing his pennies, and like you said, when they finally off him, he turns into this pile of pennies. That's one of my sequences that I enjoyed quite a bit. I remember that sequence because I'm like, this is cool, because instead of like blood or whatever, he's losing coins, which we've alluded to is where he gets his power from. So as they're beating the crap out of him, knocking him down the stairs, he's becoming more vulnerable because he's losing those coins. And I liked that concept. I'm like, and then we'd go away from that. And it's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
Here we go.
the other weird thing, you mentioned that you like the witches in this movie because
Mhm.
it's not just Cora and Effie Kolb. There's a whole like community of witches in these hills, and we get like one scene where they're kind of assembling on the outskirts of this church graveyard, and
Mhm.
there's a cool sequence where they call upon the hypocrisy of the people who are buried in the graveyard because it's consecrated ground, but then realizing like, oh, this person was an adulteress, this person killed somebody. So the Crooked Man is able to use that to basically defile and raise their corpses to attack the people inside the church. Great scene in the comics, pretty well executed,
Mhm.
on the screen. But I like that the witches were just kind of like an assemblage of kind of disturbed looking old ladies. They didn't have to go crazy with the like the Sam Raimi witch makeup,
Yeah.
which brings me to a key difference from the comics that I'm disappointed they didn't include because I think they swapped it out for the spider sequence. Um, but on the other hand, there's a moment when I'm reading the Crooked Man comic and I turn a page and I almost gasped. I was on the train because there's an image in there that is so like it was done in 2008, but
Right.
I didn't think they'd allow this in this century. There's part of this legend where there's a whole bunch of witches that were trapped down in those mines,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
and we see them and they were like part native and part other kinds of witches, but these are like straight up they practically had bones through their noses, like, and they're like very stereotypically drawn. But there was a whole bit there involving the witches down in the mines, and I think maybe because they couldn't afford to do like make fright makeup on 30 actors, they went with this crappy CGI spider. But that kind of helped, and more so than, oh, there's this network of veins running under this
Yeah.
town and the mines and stuff. If you actually have these witches that are down there that are trapped and trying to get out and using the chaos that's going on with the Crooked Man and the church and all that stuff, that had some real tension to it. And again, another missed opportunity. They get a little bit of action with Hellboy fighting the corpses, but there was a lot more of that stuff in the book.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and in general, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities to actually make this a nice little neat Hellboy story, a little neat 90 some minutes, say Hellboy tale that, yeah, okay, it goes to VOD, but you doesn't mean you don't have to can't get a little more creative with it. In fact, it should allow you to be a little bit more, you know, accurate or whatnot, or whatever you want to do with it, artistically or whatnot, or stick to the source material more, because it is not going to the big studio. So I would imagine, producers may not as have much input. Or what had happened is they maybe wanted to release this to the theaters, and then they saw some of the reaction online and such, and then they just go, yeah, okay, we're just going to slide that over to streaming and call it a day. Because we've seen some movies in the past like that, where I've seen the trailers in the theater hey, it's coming to the theater soon. And next thing you know, oh, look, it's on streaming the next week. And I'm like, okay.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much that's half the movies that came out this summer,
Pretty
like
much,
mainstream movies. I do want to say there was a kind of a cool thing that they recreated in the movie from the comics, and I was pleasantly surprised when they put it in. Now it's a little bit out of place because they do have like a chapter break for it.
right.
There aren't really chapters in the rest of the movie, but witch balls. Remember the witch
Yes.
balls sequence?
Yeah.
Yeah, like here you can see I don't know if you can see that, but
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
they break the story to have this like Tales in the Crypt style thing of this witch who pops out of nowhere and tell you how to make witch balls, and they do that same thing here. So that was the sort of EC Comics, brought to life in this creepy little one-off ghost story that I was hoping I would see in an adaptation of the Crooked Man. I was excited after I finished reading this
Mhm.
comic. I'm like you, I saw the trailer. I'm like, what is this? It's not the big budget spectacle of the other films that we've seen in the series. It looks low rent. It looks, like, oh, we couldn't afford to do anything else. So we're going to set it in the woods. That might still be true, but at least the story that they were allegedly adapting, once I actually read it, I'm like, yeah, you this needs to be a personal, small
Sure.
budget kind of a movie, and I think they did try, at least. I'll give them that.
They did. No, I mean, it's a concerted effort, and again, there are more elements I enjoyed than not. It's just I wish they would have made some other decisions. Then I think I would have liked this a lot more. But I was really mixed when I ended it because I was like, huh. It was one of those like I didn't feel like I wasted my time because I especially didn't read the source material. But at the same time, I was just like, okay, I now understand why it went to VOD. It was one of those, it
Yeah.
was just one of those things where I'm like, yep, I can see why they did this now, and that's where it probably is going to have a better life than if it ever would have made it to the big screen because it's one of those where I'm kind of glad I didn't see it on the big screen because it's much like the Firestarter remake they made. If you have it on the big screen, you could see a lot more of the stuff to where you're like, ooh, that needed another pass. Or, yeah, they needed to do that effect differently because then it really shows that, oh, you intended to do this for streaming.
I did not see the Firestarter remake,
You're not
fortunately.
see it, no, no, you're not.
But all right, let's pull over because
Yes.
Miguel has a lot of things to say.
Hooray,
Uh,
Miguel.
I know we kind of going off on our tangents as we do, Mark. So kind of catch up
What?
these comments. Yeah, I know, right? It's better than the last one, at least, right? Yes.
Yeah, for me too. I
Yeah.
would say it the story was more engaging than in the last one. I'm gonna definitely give it that. As much as we've said that, oh, the story, could have been leaner for what is presented compared to the last one. I enjoyed the story in this one more, and I think it is a better of these last two films. I think it's the better of them, which isn't a high bar necessarily, but I think it is it is the better one of the two.
Yeah, I would say you've got Hellboy, The Golden Army, this movie, and then Hellboy 2019. I
Mhm.
would put them in that order. Yeah, the spider thing I heard is from a different book. They mashed some stories into one. Yep, that makes sense. And I kind of want to read that spider story now because I would bet that it was probably interesting
Well, the one,
because it belonged in another story.
before we go to the other comic, I like that because what they could have done is they could have let the spider story drop. That's the thing. They did not need to bring the spider back at all. Once it got them to derail the train and get them into the Appalachian Mountains, which is, part of it. Okay, I'm good. I don't need to see the spider served it. It got away. We could visit it if this film actually is popular enough, maybe do a sequel that you could come back to it. I don't know. Didn't need to have it come back and play a part in the end at all.
Or it could be like a stinger, like
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
going off into the sunset, and all of a sudden the spider like pops up and it's like, oh,
Pops
you
back
left
up.
him
Yeah.
behind. Especially it's because they have that little moth thing or whatever in the jar that's supposed to be a demon familiar, and he's
Right.
like, Hellboy's like, I hate those things. That's also in the comic. Doesn't really come to anything as I remember, but you already have one thing that is a small bug in a jar that's potentially dangerous, and then you add this other thing, but it's in a box. Ooh. All right, let's see. I only wish they would have kept the look of Hellboy consistent. He looked like Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique with the faded makeup, like watered down look. Yeah, agreed. He's not quite as Crayola red in this one, but I think that kind of goes with the gray, mountains aesthetic that they have going on here. I wouldn't expect him to be that bright, although he is in the comics. Yeah. Anyway, any thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, no, yeah, his look wasn't consistent. There were some shots where I thought he looked really good, and then there were shots in the daylight, especially where he had his shirt open, where I'm like, that's a chest panel. I'm like, they didn't, I'm like sitting here going, not necessarily saying you have to work out, but I'm like, that's just a chest panel that they put on so they could save time with makeup, probably,
Yeah.
when they're shooting. It was a whole production call, I think. So yeah, there was an inconsistent look with him.
Yeah. I also missed the I don't know if they did this in the Perlman version, but I know in the comics he's got like these giant hooked or cloved feet that stick
Yeah.
out of his boots. In this one, he's just wearing boots.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. Um, you can remove the agent and the spider from the movie, and it will not affect the direction of the story and actually improve it. Agreed. There you go. I'm bringing you around, Miguel. Rob Zombie directed this movie. Jerry Moon Zombie would be in it, and the movie would have a better tittle. Yeah, hey,
Tittle.
and
Well,
that's
it would
it.
have tittle probably in it. It would
Yeah.
probably have some more tittle in it if it Rob Zombie film. So completely, yeah. I like that word. I'm adopting that word. Copyright Miguel, of course, but I hope I can borrow it because tittle. That's that's a good one.
I would not use that in polite company. Only on live streams.
Only on live stream,
Yeah.
so I can get canceled. Sure. Okay.
And then Zombie does what Zombie does best.
Yeah.
Yes, I could totally see Rob Zombie directing a Hellboy movie. Now I think about it,
Oh
because
yeah.
I'm in the minority opinion. I like Halloween 2. I'm a big fan, except for 3 from Hell. I thought that was trash, but his House of Thousand Corpses and particularly Devil's Rejects, I think are
Devil's
pretty
Rejects.
stunning.
Devil's Rejects was such a hard follow up. It surprised me at all that he did the 3 from Hell storyline, because I'm like, Devil's Rejects, any horror fan who's into stuff, even if they don't like other Rob Zombie stuff, everybody that I know talks about Devil's Rejects, and it sticks when they're like, yeah, that's probably one of his best films. And yeah, it's I if he did it, I would want to see him do it on a scale like this story. Not a big scale. I would love to see him do it on this kind of a smaller scale story like this with Hellboy. He could totally pull off the visuals. He'd probably come up with even more wicked visuals as well.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, he
I could
just
see that.
whatever the 2005 budget for Devil's Rejects was, or whenever that came out.
Mhm.
I mean, because that's a pretty sparse. It's a road picture, right?
It's the road, yeah.
So yeah, you could totally do that, and I would be there for it. And Miguel, never apologize. My meds
No,
kicked
yeah.
in. Sorry about the title.
No, we knew what you meant. I like the word, so I wanted to say it. I wanted to say it. So
Yeah. See, you gave Mark a new word,
you
Miguel.
gave me a
Thank
new
you.
word. Thank you, Miguel.
All right. Well,
Um,
any closing thoughts on Hellboy, the Crooked Man?
I I would say, yeah, if you're a Hellboy fan, you may want to watch it just to see what they do with it. With it being on streaming, it makes it a little bit more palatable, especially if you wait and it gets moved to, a cheaper price streaming, say,
$7.
yeah, it's $7 now. So even that's like the price of one ticket at the theater. So I mean, you're not going to waste your time, because there is enough here, I think, of interest to keep you engaged enough to where you're like, okay, where you might be disappointed a little bit with it. I think overall, I it's a middle of the road film. I am not exaggerating when I say I enjoyed it better than the bigger budget one with David Harbour, because this story makes more sense than that story in that film, because it's a pretty straightforward horror. I like that they went a little more horror with this than what we've seen in the past, like some not necessarily subtle horror, but just the atmosphere and everything. It feels like a horror, gothic horror film, versus some others, because it's not as slick, it's not as polished, because they didn't have the budget, and that I think works to its favor as far as the aesthetic goes. So yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's worth the rental. I mean, don't expect to necessarily be blown away. This is not a blow you away film, but it's also one that if you're looking for something and you're like, oh, Hellboy, sure, I think you'll find enough to enjoy. You probably won't revisit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I'm in a tough spot here because as much as think it deviates from the comic, the
Mhm.
only way I can recommend that people watch this movie is if they have read the comic book and they're looking for a prime example of how not to adapt something. Because it's no, seriously, because it's
Sure,
fascinating the
sure, yeah,
choices they make. Like,
yeah,
seriously, can't you just I would love for someone to get the rights to this and make their own version of this to come out next year as a
yeah,
straight adaptation and just see what happens. Do the Pepsi challenge. But other than that, like I just think it's too different from the other movies, but it's also very similar to a lot of other horror movies, kind of its kind, particularly Evil Dead and a lot of other like
sure.
we're gonna go
Mhm.
off in the woods because we have no money, and scare people. Yeah, it's just really a miss for me on too many levels, which is unfortunate because there is enough in here that I'm glad that I watched it and I can take some things away. But I feel like if I said, "Hey, spend $7 of your money, 90 minutes of your time to watch this movie," I feel like people would punch me if they could. But
Fair enough.
that's just me. Now,
Mm.
uh, Miguel says we need Hellboy sooner or later. They will give it back to Del Toro. I certainly hope so. I don't know because in reading up on this for the show, I found that Mignola apparently did not like Del Toro's take on
Yeah,
Hellboy,
I read
which
that too.
is
Yeah.
weird to me. I mean,
Mhm.
it definitely does feel different his movies than the comics, but I feel like the spirit is there. And if you're gonna make the Hellboy Dark Horse comics into a franchise, that's kind of the route I feel like you have to go. So who knows what the future holds? But yeah, Del Toro's
But
it's always got a place in
you
my heart.
that's just tough with the creatives when they get their opinions. I hate when they ask the opinions, because I'm like, okay, this is a person who put their heart and soul into this project and it became big and they love it. And then you're asking, well, how'd you think they made it? And if the person doesn't, depending on the artist, if that person doesn't get it exactly correct or how they think it's going to be, they're going to say, yeah, no, that was trash. Even if the film on its own is good, if you're not familiar with the source material. But the creatives are going to feel that way naturally, because it means something to them, because it's something they created and someone else is trying to re-envision their product. Or you get some creators who try to ignore their product, which I will never let people forget that Maximum Overdrive exists and that I love that movie. And I don't care if Stephen King disowns it and says it's the movie cocaine made. I don't remember shooting it and I don't like it. I don't care. I love it. And I will remind people constantly that it exists. So
And I need to watch it because I still have not seen Maximum Overdrive. But you've made up for, my
I
lifetime of
probably
not having
I've
seen it.
made up for you. Yeah. I
Yeah, but that's no excuse. I gotta watch it. But I will say the flip side to that are the creators who, again, get tons of money from the studio to
Mhm.
shill the latest bastardization of their product. I will never forgive James Cameron for coming out and saying, "Yeah, Terminator Genesis is the Terminator sequel that I would have made after 2 if I could have." Yeah. Anyway, last word goes to Miguel, as did the first. Maximum Overdrive rules. So you're in good company, Mark. Great company, in fact.
Good
All
taste,
right.
Miguel. Good taste.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for hanging out and talking about or listening to us talk about or talking about because Miguel, you jumped in here. Hellboy the Crooked Man. I keep wanting to say the Crooked Army, but that's a mashup that I don't need to get into. But yeah, it's available now on streaming. If you wait a few weeks, you might be able to find it for free on streaming without having to sail the
Mhm.
high seas. And yeah, I paid for it. I paid for it psychically. I paid for it 3 times if you count the graphic novel, which I highly recommend you get. That's my stance. That's my recommendation. Skip the movie, read the book, and then decide if you're going to watch the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but yeah, Mark, I appreciate you as always, I should have just stopped with I appreciate you, Mark.
Oh,
You're the best.
We try.
But
We try. I'm glad
but yeah.
I'm glad I could come make it on the show. So you weren't just ranting, yelling at the clouds yourself. So
well, I'm glad you could make it too. Oh my gosh, hold on a
Petty!
second.
Oh my
Wait
god.
a second.
Petty gave us a
back
happy
from the
Halloween.
proverbial grave. Yes, happy Halloween. Happy Halloween to you too, Petty. Jeez.
Devil's Night, my new favorite holiday. Anyway.
Petty, I don't know if you're just joining us. If so, we're winding down. So feel free to go back and watch the show on replay. But yeah, it's great to see you again. So thank you, everybody out there. If you like this show, please like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and tell your friends, and be sure and follow Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck on Special Mark Productions, and you can join us live on his channel, his YouTube channel, every Monday night, almost without fail for the last, are we going up on a half decade? Is that right, Mark?
We're close. Yeah. Next year I think will be 5 years that
The
you've
Spoiler
been on the
Room.
show. Yes. So.
Yeah, the Spoiler Room podcast. Every week it's a new movie experience for me, because he pulls out things that I have never heard of, I've never seen, filling in blind spots, talking about movies that are far better than Hellboy the Crooked Man. Yeah. Oh, okay. Hold on. I keep saying this.
Happy
Closing
Halloween.
out comments after this, I swear. Happy Halloween, not Rob Zombies. Yeah, cute Miguel. And meds. Just love meds. All right. Well, thanks everybody out there. Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween to you too, Mark. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you. Same to you.
And yeah, trick or treat or something. Dress up as Hellboy, but not this one or the David Harbour one, but the Ron Perlman one for sure. Yeah. All right. Good night, everyone. And yeah, catch you later.